My name is Evelyn Sears, and on the last night of the year, my father stood on a stage in front of 140 guests, lifted a crystal champagne glass, and announced that he was handing the family company to my brother. The ballroom exploded in applause. Champagne rose into the air. The band started playing something triumphant, and my brother Colton stood there smiling like he had just inherited a kingdom. But here's what nobody in that room knew. Not my father, not my mother, not the board members clapping near the stage, not even the journalists taking photos beside the champagne tower. For 14 months, I had been preparing for that exact moment. And at exactly midnight, I pressed send. To understand what happened that night, you first need to understand my family, and the company that destroyed it. Sears Meridian Group started with one delivery truck and a rented warehouse outside Charlotte. That was my father's favorite story. He told it at every holiday party, every shareholder dinner, every interview. How he worked 18-hour days, how he begged 3 banks for a line of credit. How nobody believed in him except himself. By the time I was in high school, Sears Meridian was a growing manufacturing and logistics company. By the time I graduated from Wharton, it was publicly traded. 230 employees, 4 facilities, hundreds of millions in revenue, and one very clear family hierarchy. My father, Gerald Sears, believed sons inherited companies, daughters inherited memories. I heard him say it when I was 16. A son carries the name, he told my mother one night while I sat nearby doing homework. A daughter carries the memories. I remember staring at my math book while he said it. I remember pretending not to hear. I also remember deciding that one day I would make him regret underestimating me. But people like Gerald Sears never think regret applies to them. I joined Sears Meridian at 26. Not as an executive, not as a princess with a title. As an intern, I worked 80-hour weeks. I rebuilt the internal audit system from scratch. I corrected vendor reporting failures nobody else noticed. During a liquidity crisis that nearly destroyed the company, I restructured $47 million in short-term debt and kept payroll alive. 230 employees kept their jobs because I refused to let the numbers collapse. My father thanked the leadership team during the board meeting. The next day he bought Colton a new Porsche. That was my family. I did the work. Colton got the applause. My brother joined the company 3 years ago. Vice President of Business Development, corner office, executive assistant, corporate card, no accountability. Colton's entire division was built around vague words nobody could measure: client relationships, strategic expansion, vendor partnerships. Mostly he traveled to conferences, shook hands, ordered expensive dinners, and called it leadership. Meanwhile, I was usually the first person in the building every morning. 6:30 sharp, empty parking lot. Server room humming through the walls beside my office. I liked that sound, the sound of systems working, the sound of numbers behaving correctly. Every audit trail in the company passed through my department: payroll, vendor payments, quarterly filings, debt reporting, SEC disclosures. I reviewed everything personally because I couldn't tolerate mistakes. That was my weakness, not loyalty, not naivety, perfectionism. I couldn't leave a spreadsheet unfinished. Couldn't walk away from a discrepancy, because numbers become disasters when ignored long enough. I learned that before anyone else in my family did. 3 years before the New Year's Eve disaster, my father hosted a huge birthday party at the estate. 80 guests, live band, champagne towers, crystal chandeliers, same ballroom, same stage, same performance. I remember exactly where I was standing when Gerald raised his glass and announced, "Tonight, I want to introduce the future of Sears Meridian. My son Colton, the one I've been raising for this." Everyone applauded. My brother walked onto the stage smiling. My mother cried. And I stood near the back holding a champagne glass I never drank from. Nathan, my husband, leaned toward me. "He didn't mention you once. I noticed. You saved this company 2 years ago. I noticed that too." Nathan squeezed my hand. I stared at the stage and realized something ugly. My father genuinely believed Colton deserved credit simply because he existed. Competence had nothing to do with it. 14 months before that final New Year's Eve party, everything changed. Thanksgiving dinner, just family, turkey, wine, my mother's casserole recipe from 1994. And Gerald announcing succession plans between bites of stuffing. "Colton will transition into co-CEO by spring," he said casually. "Full CEO by January." I set down my fork. "Has the board discussed independent evaluation?" Silence. Gerald looked annoyed immediately. "This is family business, Evelyn." Colton leaned back in his chair smiling. My mother touched my arm softly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." That sentence followed me my entire life. Every time I questioned something, every time I spoke too directly, every time I refused to shrink quietly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," I let the conversation drop. But the next Monday morning, I reviewed Colton's quarterly numbers, and that's when I found Greystone Industrial Supply. At first, it looked ordinary: a vendor contract, monthly payments, logistics consulting services. But something bothered me. Actually, several things bothered me. 3 vendor names existed under slightly different registrations: Greystone Industrial Supply LLC, Greystone Logistics Solutions, Greystone Supply Group. Different names, same bank account, same routing information, every payment structured just below reporting thresholds. I checked corporate registrations: P.O. Box in Delaware, no office, no website, no employees. No public records except incorporation paperwork. I sat at my desk staring at the screen while the server room hummed beside me. Then I pulled payment authorizations. Every contract carried Colton's signature. Over 8 months, Sears Meridian had transferred $2 million to companies that barely existed. I printed every record, every wire transfer, every invoice, every approval chain. Then I drove home carrying the folder in my bag. Nathan was in the kitchen when I walked in. He looked at the papers. "What's that?" I set the folder on the table carefully. The beginning of something I can't undo. Nathan worked in corporate litigation. Not exactly securities law, but close enough. He spent 2 hours reviewing the documents spread across our dining table. Finally, he leaned back. "Shell companies. I know. If this reaches the SEC, it becomes securities fraud. I know that too." He looked at me carefully. "You need protection if you report this. I'm not doing it for money. I know. But if Gerald buries this internally, employees suffer when it explodes later." That part mattered most. 230 employees depended on Sears Meridian. Payroll mattered. Retirement accounts mattered. Families mattered. My father treated the company like a monarchy. I treated it like responsibility. That was the difference between us. 2 weeks later, after midnight, I sat alone at the kitchen table with my laptop open. SEC whistleblower portal. I filled out every section carefully: company name, violation details, vendor structures, payment patterns, supporting evidence. At 11:47 p.m. I hit submit. My phone buzzed seconds later. Confirmation received. Reference number assigned. I stared at the screen for a long time, because that moment changed everything. Someone outside my family now knew the truth. And once truth enters a federal system, it doesn't disappear quietly. I saved the confirmation on an encrypted drive and locked it in our safe. The next morning I went to work at 6:30 like always. Same parking lot, same servers humming through the wall, same spreadsheets. Nobody suspected anything. Not Gerald, not Colton, not even my assistant Pam. But from that day forward I started building a second file. Private, offline, every suspicious contract, every email chain, every payment, every approval, organized perfectly. Because if this ever exploded, I intended to survive it. 3 months later, the SEC contacted me through the secure portal. An investigator had been assigned. They wanted more documentation, vendor onboarding records, internal communications, approval workflows. I had all of it because I built the systems myself. Over the next month, I uploaded everything carefully. And while I quietly built a federal fraud case against my own family, my father prepared to crown my brother king. One afternoon, Gerald announced a company-wide town hall. The subject line read, "The future of Sears Meridian." Everyone knew what it meant. The conference room filled completely. Gerald stood at the podium smiling proudly, while a giant photo of Colton appeared behind him on a projector screen. Then came the speech. "Every great company needs a successor who understands people," Gerald announced. "I'm proud to name my son, Colton Sears, as co-CEO in training." Polite applause filled the room. Colton gave a rehearsed speech afterward. Vision, leadership, future growth. Not once did he mention me. Afterward, my assistant Pam closed my office door. "He didn't even say your name." I looked back at my computer calmly. "I know what I contributed." Pam stared at me quietly, then she nodded once. Sometimes silence says more than sympathy. That night my mother called. "Wasn't today wonderful?" she asked. "Your brother looked so presidential." Presidential, I nearly laughed. He looked rehearsed. Paused, then softly, "Evelyn, don't make this harder than it has to be." Same sentence. Again, always. I hung up and reopened the SEC portal. Status, active, under review. The investigation was growing, and so was my certainty, because deep down, I already knew exactly how this story would end. I just didn't know yet that it would end at midnight, with champagne glasses still bubbling in people's hands. 3 months after I filed the whistleblower complaint, the SEC finally made contact. Not a phone call, not a letter, a message through the secure portal. An investigator had been assigned to the case. They reviewed my evidence and officially opened a preliminary investigation into Sears Meridian Group. They wanted more. Specifically, vendor onboarding files, payment authorization records, internal communications, approval chains, executive oversight documentation. In other words, they wanted proof this wasn't just incompetence. They wanted proof it was intentional, and I had access to all of it because I was vice president of finance. Every transaction in that company eventually passed through my systems, so over the next 4 weeks I built a second submission. At work I acted completely normal. I attended meetings, reviewed forecasts, approved payroll, smiled at board members. Meanwhile, every night after dinner, I sat at my dining room table with my laptop open, organizing evidence into folders. Nathan would sit across from me reading case law while I worked. Sometimes he'd look up and ask only one question: how bad is it? And every time my answer got shorter. Worse, by April I had traced over $8 million routed through the Greystone entities, 3 fake companies, 1 bank account, all approved through Colton's division, and the deeper I dug, the uglier it became. There were no deliverables, no shipping confirmations, no inventory logs, no consulting reports, nothing. The company was paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for services that did not exist. The SEC investigator responded within days after my second upload. The message was brief: documentation received. Continue preserving records. That was when it became real, not suspicion, not theory, a federal case. At the office, life kept moving like nothing was wrong. Gerald announced a company-wide town hall meeting titled "The Future of Sears Meridian." Everyone knew what that meant. Colton, the heir apparent. My assistant Pam stood in my doorway holding the printed calendar invite. "You want me to block your afternoon?" "No," I said, "I'll attend." She hesitated. Pam had worked with me for 6 years. She noticed everything. "You okay?" "I'm busy." She nodded slowly and left. That afternoon, I opened the SEC portal again. Status: active, under review. I stared at the words for a long time, then minimized the screen before anyone could walk in. The town hall was held in the main conference room, standing room only. Managers, supervisors, warehouse leads, finance staff, operations directors, even people from shipping showed up. Gerald loved audiences. He stood at the podium wearing a navy suit and silver tie, smiling like a man unveiling a monument. A giant slide appeared behind him. Leadership transition plan, and there it was. A professionally edited photo of Colton smiling with his arms crossed, like a magazine cover nobody asked for. Gerald spent 20 minutes talking about legacy, about growth, about leadership, about vision. Then finally, every great company eventually needs someone who understands not only business, but people. He turned toward Colton. "I'm proud to announce my son, Colton Sears, will begin serving as co-CEO in training effective immediately." Polite applause filled the room. Not excitement, not admiration, politeness. There's a difference. Colton walked to the podium like he was accepting an award he'd already rehearsed for in the mirror. He thanked the employees, thanked the board, thanked Gerald, thanked everyone who believed in him. He never mentioned me once. Not even indirectly, and that hurt less than it should have, because by then I expected it. After the meeting ended, Pam followed me back to my office, closed the door. "He didn't even say your name." I kept walking toward my desk. "Pam, no," she interrupted. "You rebuilt the audit system. You saved this company during the debt crisis. Everybody knows it." I sat down calmly. "I know what I did." She stared at me for a second, then quietly said, "Okay," and left. That night my mother called. Her voice sounded cheerful. "Wasn't today wonderful?" I loosened my earrings and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "If you like political theater, sure." "Evelyn," there it was, the warning tone. Soft, controlled, familiar. "You need to support your brother." "I support competent leadership." Silence. Then finally, "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I almost laughed. That sentence had followed me my entire life. When Colton failed classes, when he wrecked Gerald's car at 19, when he lost a 6-figure client contract because he forgot a meeting in Chicago. Every single time, somehow, I was the one expected to make things easier. I ended the call politely, then sat alone in the dark bedroom for almost 20 minutes thinking about one thing. Nobody in my family actually believed Colton was capable. They just believed he was entitled. And those are two very different things. Late May, Thursday evening, most of the building had emptied by 6 o'clock. Gerald was in Hilton Head for a golf fundraiser. I stayed behind to finish quarterly reconciliations. The office was silent except for the server room humming behind my wall. That sound always comforted me. Numbers running. Systems working. Truth stored somewhere physical. I needed the original vendor files, not scans, originals. Gerald kept them in a locked cabinet inside his office. Old school habits. "Paper doesn't crash," he always said. I walked into his office quietly. The sunset through the windows painted long orange lines across the carpet. I opened the top right drawer of his desk, exactly where I knew it would be, the brass key, behind a box of monogrammed pens. I held it for a second before unlocking the cabinet. Inside were 12 vendor folders. The sixth one read, quietest Industrial Supply. I pulled it out carefully. Inside was the original contract, signed by Colton. Countersigned by David Morrill. Terms, Strategic Logistics Consulting Services. Deliverables not specified. Monthly payment structure, just below reporting thresholds. Clean, intentional. Designed by someone who understood how audits worked. My stomach tightened. I photographed every page with my phone, 17 photos total. Then I returned everything exactly the way I found it. Folder aligned, cabinet locked. Key back behind the pens, drawer closed, no trace. I walked calmly to my car, but the second I shut the door my hands started shaking. Not fear, certainty. For 14 months I had suspected fraud. Now I had proof. Nathan was waiting in the kitchen when I got home. He took one look at my face and asked, "You found it?" I handed him my phone. He scrolled through the photos slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "This is bad. It gets worse." "How much worse?" "I think Gerald knows." Nathan looked up sharply. "You can prove that." "Not yet." He was quiet for a moment, then said the thing I already knew. "If Gerald approved this, the SEC won't treat it as isolated fraud." "I know. This becomes executive-level securities misconduct." I poured myself water because suddenly my throat felt dry. Nathan reached across the table and squeezed my hand once. "Not comfort, solidarity. You need to finish this," he said. And for the first time since the investigation began, I realized I would. No matter what happened to my family afterward. A week later, I met Helen Ostrowski for coffee, retired CFO, board member, sharp enough to make lawyers nervous. She stirred her coffee slowly while I talked around the subject carefully. Then she interrupted me. "This is about Greystone, isn't it?" I froze. Helen looked completely calm. "I noticed the payment structures 6 months ago. Why didn't you say anything?" She smiled sadly. "Because I've been in corporate America long enough to know what happens to women who raise concerns before they have evidence." That landed hard. She leaned forward slightly. "But you have something now, don't you?" I didn't answer. "I didn't need to." Helen nodded once, then quietly said, "Whatever you're doing, finish it." And for the first time in 14 months, I felt less alone. June arrived with heat, pressure, and the feeling that everything around me was slowly tightening. By then, the SEC investigation had moved beyond preliminary review. The investigator sent me a secure message late Sunday night. The documentation provided is substantial. To proceed toward enforcement action, we require evidence of executive-level awareness or authorization. Executive-level awareness, they meant Gerald. They needed proof my father knew about Greystone, not suspicion. Not implication, proof. I sat staring at the screen long after Nathan fell asleep beside me on the couch, because proving Colton committed fraud was one thing. Proving my father helped cover it up, that would destroy him. And once I crossed that line, there was no walking back. The next Tuesday, Gerald invited me to lunch. That almost never happened, especially not alone. We met at a steakhouse downtown where the waiters wore white gloves and spoke quietly like they were inside a church. Gerald ordered bourbon before noon, a bad sign. He leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "You've seemed distant lately." "I've been busy." "You've always been busy." The waiter arrived with bread. Neither of us touched it. Finally, Gerald sighed. "I know the succession plan has been difficult for you." I looked at him calmly. Had it, or had years of disrespect simply become impossible to ignore? "You've contributed a great deal to this company," he continued, "more than most people realize. But there was always a but. But leadership is more than numbers, Evelyn." There it was, the same sentence in a different form. "Your work matters, just not enough." "Colton connects with people," Gerald said. "He understands relationships." I almost laughed. The only relationship Colton understood was dependency. He depended on Gerald to protect him from consequences, and Gerald depended on Colton to fulfill some fantasy about legacy. I folded my napkin carefully. "You've already made your decision." Gerald nodded once. "Yes." Then he added the sentence that stayed with me for weeks afterward. "A son carries the future." I looked at my father across that table and realized something devastating. He truly believed that, even now, even after everything. He still believed gender mattered more than competence. I smiled politely through lunch, then went back to work and started planning my next move. 2 months later, I got my answer. August, Wednesday evening. Gerald was in New York meeting investors. The building was nearly empty again. I walked to his office at 7:12 p.m. The hallway lights flicked on one section at a time as I moved. Motion sensors, silent office, silent building. Silent war. The brass key was still behind the monogrammed pens. same place, same habit, same arrogance. I unlocked the cabinet carefully. This time I wasn't looking for contracts. I was looking for communication. Anything linking Gerald directly to the scheme. Folders lined the drawer alphabetically. Budgets, vendor reviews, legal memos, then CS vendor review, CS Colton Sears. I pulled the folder slowly. Inside were printed emails. 4 pages. The second I saw the subject line, my stomach dropped. Ray, Greystone, handle quietly. I sat down in Gerald's chair and started reading. First email, from Colton. Dad, Greystone invoice for Q3 is ready. Dave says he needs the wire by Friday. Second email, from Gerald. I reviewed the arrangement. Numbers work for the quarter. Keep invoices below threshold reporting levels. I'll handle any board questions. I read it twice. Then a third time, not because I didn't understand it, because I did. Gerald knew, not vaguely, not indirectly, completely. He wasn't protecting Colton from embarrassment. He was actively helping conceal fraud. My father had become part of the scheme. I photographed every page carefully. Hands steady now. No shaking anymore, because certainty changes you. I returned everything exactly where it belonged, locked the cabinet, placed the key behind the pens, closed the drawer, and walked out of the office knowing my family would never recover from what came next. Nathan was waiting at the kitchen table when I got home. I handed him my phone. He read the emails silently, then lowered the phone very slowly. That's enough for criminal exposure. I know. He instructed concealment. I know. Nathan leaned back and rubbed his face. Neither of us spoke for almost a full minute. Finally, he asked quietly, "What are you feeling right now?" I thought about it honestly. Not revenge, not satisfaction, grief. Because some part of me had still hoped Gerald didn't know, that maybe he was blind, careless, manipulated, but not corrupt. Now I knew better. I uploaded the emails to the SEC portal that night. The investigator responded within hours. Evidence received. This materially strengthens the case. Materially strengthens. Such clean words for something so ugly. September rolled into October. The investigation moved into formal enforcement review. At work, nobody knew, nobody suspected. Colton redesigned Gerald's future office, ordered furniture, had a custom nameplate made. COLTONSEARS, CEO. I walked past it every morning on my way to the finance department. Every single morning. And every single morning I thought, not for long. In October, the board officially voted on the succession plan. 5 votes in favor, 2 against. Helen Ostrowski voted no. She never explained why. She didn't need to. I abstained due to conflict of interest. Family relation, finance oversight, officially procedural, unofficially. I already knew the transition would never happen, not the way they imagined. Then November gave me the final piece. 3 days before Thanksgiving, a purchase order landed on my desk. Greystone Logistics Solutions. Amount, $890,000, largest payment yet. Company policy required VP Finance authorization for anything above $500,000, which meant Colton needed my signature. The document sat on my desk for nearly an hour. I stared at the routing slip, at Colton's approval signature, at the fake vendor name, at the amount. Then finally, I signed it, not because I approved of it, because I needed one last timestamp, one final active transaction proving the fraud was ongoing. Not historical, current, alive. That night I scanned the purchase order, the routing approval, the payment authorization, and the wire confirmation, then uploaded all of it to the SEC portal, the final evidence package, complete. Shell companies, fraudulent invoices, structured payments, executive concealment, fresh transactions, everything. Nathan texted me from upstairs. Done. I stared at the upload confirmation screen, then replied with one word, yes. The New Year's invitation arrived 2 weeks later. Heavy cream cardstock, gold lettering. A very special announcement will be made at midnight. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny. Because by then the irony was almost unbearable. My mother called that afternoon. Wear something elegant, she said warmly. This is Colton's night. Then came the sentence I'd heard my entire life. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I closed my eyes, same words, same pressure, same expectation that I would shrink myself to preserve everyone else's comfort. But this time was different. Because this time, I already had the truth sitting in a federal database waiting for one final click. And Gerald had unknowingly chosen the perfect moment himself. Midnight, a stage, an audience, a public coronation. He wanted witnesses, and he was about to get them. The countdown had already started.